Hi, everyone. Yes, I am Charity Monareng. I'm the Executive Director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy International. So before this session, I was like, mine's going to be a bit different because we kind of experienced the US funding cuts prior to the actual US funding cuts. So just a brief background. So SSDP International it branched away from SSDP US, which was, I guess they call themselves the parent organization, but they were the original organization. And so the founders of SSDP International in 2020 decided that they would move away from SSDP US because their focus was solely US focused, but there was a lot of interest from young people across the globe that wanted to really participate or engage in policy discussions. So in 2020, SSDP International branched out, and there was a promise of funding to SSDP International from the US chapter. And so a year into the newly established organization, literally overnight, very similar. So when Trump did what he did, it was a bit of PTSD. So literally overnight, the US chapter communicated with the then founder and said that we can't fund anymore. This is after the promise and paperwork was signed. And so the organization had like 75,000 of its capital starting funds taken away. In addition to that, a lot of the donations that SSDP International was receiving was from the cannabis businesses in the US. And I think at the time, I think this was in 2022, there was an order that spoke about, I think, taxing cannabis businesses. And so our funding or donations from the cannabis market also depleted. So we're essentially in a situation where we didn't have any funding. So I came into the organization. There was unfortunately no transparency, and it was said that, oh no, there's money for the running of the organization. And 3 months into my directorship, I was informed that we were running out of money. So this, obviously, when I took over, I didn't know that this was going to be the situation, and it gave us an opportunity, and I speak about this now, and I'm very happy that I stuck it through because it allowed us to pivot our efforts, but also to restructure as an organization. So a lot of our experience, especially among the youth movement, is this impression that we are very disorganized, very messy. We don't have our things in order, and this was unfortunately the situation, that our business was not in order. So the U.S. funding cuts literally it allowed us to take a step back and really look at how are we going to adapt in this market where we don't have any funding, there are no salaries, but the work still needs to continue. So developed policies, made a decision to move we're initially headquartered in Austria, and so we moved our operations to South Africa because we're like, we need to find a way to find money. And as an organization based in the global north, we're not going to find money when our majority of our network members are based in Africa. So I made the decision to move our operations to South Africa. SSDP was not necessarily known. I started at SSDP in 2023. However, my reputation in the drug policy space allowed me to at least get some traction for SSDP International. Although our chapters work on a volunteer basis, the US funding cuts didn't necessarily impact our advocacy at the national levels because we're not receiving funding from USAID or any of those organizations. However, what had happened was that our partnerships with, for example, Department of Basic Education, who was receiving funding on different projects from UNAIDS, their funding got cut. And we approached them and we're like, we know that this is the situation. We are happy to provide you with support to relook at your drug policies in the schooling education. So let us step in as a technical partner to assist. So after all of that, putting together, trying to build SSDP's reputation, we were able to build a partnership with the Department of Basic Education. So today, as we said, SSDP is a strategic and technical partner for the Department of Basic Education. But we also provide technical support to the Department of International Relations and Corporations, which is our, I guess, international affairs department, who in Vienna, with the US funding cuts, there were a lot of geopolitics that took place, but we found ourselves in a situation where we could leverage the solidarity and the partnerships that we built with the department to try and get them to push back against the US, because they're really pushing against a very progressive move from what they basically proposed last year, which was around harm reduction. Now this year, there was a lot of geopolitics playing out. But we used our relationships with the Department of International Relations to try and get them to push back, and that we succeeded in that element. Similar to Geneva with the human rights and ensuring that there were human rights, there was language around human rights at the Human Rights Council. We were able to provide support to the department to make sure that they kept language like harm reduction into the policies, even pushing back against countries that were really trying to remove a lot of the progressive language. So as I said, our experience is quite different. And even though we're not directly impacted, like we were implicitly impacted, however, we've been able to maneuver and find a way around it, but also shift away from the dependence on literally depending on one funding source, but also finding a way on how we could survive and adapt in a very difficult crisis situation. Thank you.